Hello. On behalf of the Churches of Christ and Christ's Way Bible Institute, we welcome you to the rebroadcast of our Monday morning class. It is our desire to assist all who are interested in various Bible and New Testament doctrines and teachings. We set as a goal one online class each Monday morning. Information and links to the live meeting can be found on our website, www.thechurchesofchrist.life, on the live meetings page. May God bless your studies in His Word.
Thank you for the wonderful songs. Now followed by the song, I request Joshua can read the Bible portion for our short meditation. The Bible portion is Genesis 5. Yes.
The Bible portion is taken from the Genesis 5, chapter 5, words 5,
6.
chapter 6, words 5, 6, 7, and 8. Then the Lord saw that the weakness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only even continually. And the Lord was sorrow that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things and bird of the air. For I am sorry that I made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Joshua, for reading the Bible. Now, it is a time of hearing the Lord's lessons. As you know, Brother Brian Barrett is our regular guest speaker, and he's taught many portions from the Bible. Today, the wonderful topic is Genesis, from the Genesis. The lessons are the great fruit and beginning of nations. Now we warmly welcome Brother Brian Barrett. Please come. Please take the lessons for the people. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. We send our greetings from the church at Bear Branch in Spurlockville, West Virginia, to our brothers and sisters throughout the world. And we truly appreciate you, love you, pray for you, and we wish the very best of things in your life. Today we're going to be continuing in our study of the book of Genesis. This time we're looking at the concept or the idea of a new beginning. Last time that we were here, we were looking at the aspect that God had sent the man and the woman out of the garden because of their sins. And so as we enter today's lesson, we want to think about the concepts of time. Time can be split up and referenced in various ways, but for the purpose of our lesson, we're going to be talking and have been talking about the period of time which we might think of as the period of innocence. This is the time that the man and woman were in the garden and they were being faithful to God. And then, having been cast out of the garden, they began what becomes a new existence in the world. Not as easy as it had been before. We saw that the woman's pain was increased in childbearing, and she was subjected to her husband. And he was told that the ground would no longer easily produce food, but from the sweat of his brow, through difficult labor, he would continue. So today, as we look at this new beginning, we think of it from a historical standpoint as the period of time which is pre-diluvian or before the flood. As man and woman went out into the world and they were fruitful, they did begin to multiply, they did begin to fill the earth. Now, as Brother Joshua read just a few moments ago from the book of Genesis, beginning in chapter 5, we see that in the course of time, as men began to increase on the face of the earth, so did their sins. The sin that began in the Garden of Eden was multiplied time after time after time in the lives of individuals. And so in the course of that time, as we're going to read about, or we can read about in chapters 4 and chapter 5, the sins multiplied to the point where it repented God that he had made man to dwell on the earth. Therefore, he set in process a great flood to destroy the sinfulness of man. And we're told that Noah found favor in the eyes of God. And so in our keeping track of time, we have the time of innocence. We have the pre-diluvian or the pre-flood time. And then there is the time of the great flood. And following that is the post-diluvian or post-flood world, where literally things begin anew with the family of Noah and his descendants, which ultimately leads us to an understanding of how the nations come to be. And then from that, which we're not going to study today, but from that period comes the fruit of what will ultimately be the children of Israel and the nation of Israel. And so we find in the study after the flood how the nations of the world came to be, and then how it is that God chose a particular people. And we'll save God's choice of Abraham and his descendants for our next lesson. Today, we're just going to be looking at the concept of beginning anew and the nations as it applies to the pre-flood, flood, and post-flood era of time. Now, I hope you can see some of these charts and that there will be clear. You can, we'll get the video up. There are many different charts and studies that you can find online. But this is the genealogy of Adam as it is recorded in chapters 4 and chapter 5 as men begin to multiply on the face of the earth. And we need to understand that the history that Moses gave to the children of Israel about the descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth, and how those two lineages were separate, is a background history. There is much about the descendants of Cain, and there's much about the descendants of Seth, and there is much about the other sons and daughters which we're told Adam and Eve had. We don't know how many children Adam and Eve had. We know that they had Abel, and they had Cain, and they had Seth, and then other sons and daughters. And obviously they had to have daughters for their sons to marry so that the population could increase. And so when we look in chapters 4 and chapters 5 of the book of Genesis, we find that Abel is somewhat short-lived as far as the information we have. And apparently he had no sons and daughters, at least as recorded in the scriptures. And so what we have in the 4th chapter is a listing of Cain, who rose up and killed his brother Abel, who had offered, as we said last week, a more excellent sacrifice based on faith. Cain, who was a murderer, fled out into the world with what family he had and what others he was able to marry into later on of the descendants of Seth and the other sons and daughters of Adam as the earth was filled. We have this listing, this genealogy of Cain. He begot Enoch. Enoch begot Irad. Irad begot Mahushael. Then Methuselah, Lamech, And Lamech's sons were Jabal and Jabal and Nasa and Tubal-Cain. These are the descendants that we have listed in the 4th chapter. And so by these, as well as Seth's descendants and the sons and daughters, others of Adam and Eve, the earth was filled. And we really, while it may look like, as we read in the first or in the 4th and 5th chapter, when we first read that, it may seem like there were really few people on the face of the earth. But in the hundreds of years after Cain and Seth and the other descendants of Adam and Eve began to reproduce and live extremely long lives, we assume because God intended for them to populate the earth. The earth was filled both with individuals as well as sin as it increased. And as time goes on, Cain had fled from Adam and Eve. And then Seth, we have his descendants. And like we said, we have the other sons and daughters. And then all of these lineages begin to intermix as the world was populated. And the sins of these individuals caused God to become very depressed, if you want to call it that, to the point that he repented that he had made man to dwell on the face of the earth. Now, what we see is for a period of time, it appears in Genesis 4 that the family of Cain was somewhat separate from the family of Seth, and they were probably separate. Cain was probably separated from these others. We're told that when Seth was born, that mankind began to call upon the name of the Lord. They began to worship him in a more formal way. But the time came that the godly descendants of Seth began to intermarry with the descendants of Cain, and these others, as the earth was populated, and the sinful nature of these individuals that is revealed in Genesis 4 intermix with the godliness of the descendants of Seth and the others. And so because of the intermarriage of these peoples, the earth was defiled and filled with sin. And so once again, in this pre-diluvian, pre-flood world, the power of sin corrupted this world, just as sin corrupted Adam and Eve in the garden. And because of that, we're told God determined to destroy the world that then was with a great flood. Now, we're told that Noah found favor in the eyes of God. And because of that, Peter tells us in 1 Peter 3, 20, 21, that because of his faithfulness in building the ark, as described beginning in chapter 6 and following, his faithfulness caused 8 souls to be saved by water. Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives. And so was the family of man carried through the flood in the ark, along with animals which had within them the breath of life. Now, we know the lineage of Noah as coming from Adam and Seth, and this lineage which also includes Enoch, who walked with God and was not, and God took him. We have Methuselah, which, as far as we can tell, is the oldest living man at 969 years. And so in that time, these individuals could have had many sons and daughters. We do not know a history of who Ham married. We do not have a history of who the wife of Shem was, or the wife of Japheth. And so while we have the lineage of Noah, and we know his sons were in this lineage, we do not know from which point the various daughters of man came to be married to Noah and came to marry Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And so these are the beginnings, and no doubt there is, as we will see, as in man, because of sin, even after the flood, sin will find its way back into the world. Now, Noah found favor in the eyes of God. That's an interesting statement because it doesn't say that Noah and his sons and their wives found favor in the eyes of God. So it just acknowledges Noah, which leaves the question, what type of people were his sons? As obedient sons, did they follow their father and therefore marry and enter into the ark? But we don't know about their hearts specifically, their lives. That information is not provided. Moses provided in the book of Genesis some genealogies and a very brief explanation of some of the events leading up to the flood, and then after the flood, the nations of mankind, the dividing of the earth among men. I'm going to talk for a little while about the flood and the ark. When we look in Genesis, starting in 6, 7, we read about the preparations for the flood. If we conservatively accept the fact that the cubit was about 18 inches, or about 0.45 meters, we end up with the measurement that the the ark was 450 feet long, or 137 meters. It was 75 feet wide, which is 22.8 meters, and it was 45 feet tall, which is 13.7 meters. So that is a considerable sized vehicle. Earlier last year, we had the opportunity to go over to a place here in the United States where Answers in Genesis, a religious group, have rebuilt a facsimile of the ark at its full measures. And we had the opportunity to enter into the ark and to look at the way in which it had been built by them, the various floors and sides. And the ark is very large when you begin to walk through that. And it was a very impressive day that we had the opportunity to be there. Now, the ark was not prepared for fish, not necessarily prepared for insects. the fish of the seas and those that lived in the sea would be fine during the flood. Insects and other types of animals and animal life, creeping things, could find refuge on various floating items in the course of the flood. So the ark did not have to have two of every single thing in the world. The great oceans protected those that were in it. And so the ark was for those who had in them the breath of life, primarily air-breathing animals, reptiles, some of the reptiles, some of the fowls of the air, and the animals that were upon the face of the earth. One of the arguments that has been given to try to dispute the ark is the fact that not two of everything that's on the earth today would fit in the ark. And what we have to understand is that at this time, not every type of animal that's on the earth today was actually on the earth then. And by that, I mean, take, for example, the common dog that many people have as pets and for protection. We have the little teeny teacup poodles and the large mastiff dogs, everything in between. And all of those were not necessarily in existence at that time. There was what we might call the prototype dog. And from those animals came the descendants that we see today of the various forms of dogs. The same thing with cats and other birds and animals that have been changed genetically in the course of interbreeding and various things since the flood. So if you take a couple of the prototype dogs, you don't have to have every kind that ever will be. Course of time, genetics and inbreeding and various things will produce these animals. So I say that just to understand that the population or the kinds of animals were not as intense, no doubt, at the time of the flood as they are today, having evolved some since that time through, as we said, various types of inbreeding and the genetics that naturally manifest itself in these groups. So we have a 3-floor ark that is capable of sustaining Noah and his sons and their wives, and then those two of every kind of animal, but of the animals that ultimately were used in sacrifice, there were more taken on, 7 of those, so that man could offer up sacrifices after the flood without endangering these species. Assuming, again, the more conservative cubit, which we're going to call 18 inches, the cubit was measured from the elbow of a man to the tip of his fingers. And so depending on which man's arm you're using, from the elbow to the tip of the fingers, it will be longer or shorter. But those who have looked at the ark and the measurements see that it was designed on what is called a 1:6 ratio. And naval architecture reveals this is the most stable ratio for an ocean-going vessel, and that it could easily have survived even big ocean waves. And because of the size and ratio Many have said it would be next to impossible to capsize. Now, we don't see anything on the ark, such as a sail. We don't see any means by which to steer the ark. It was merely a container to protect and house the descendants of men and the animals which were there. And so it was designed for protection, it was designed for deliverance, and it was designed so that it would be carried through the waters of the flood, that mankind could reestablish itself on the earth. Wanted to look a little bit, and like I said, this will be recorded hopefully, and we can you can play it back as it comes up later. We're going to talk about some things of the flood, and we're going to talk from Genesis 7 and 11. The initial starting point of the flood was in the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, the 17th day of the month. It tells us that the fountains of the great deep were broke apart. That is, the deep subterranean waters, which we think of as coming from springs and other underground sources, were opened or broken apart, and the water under the earth was forced up. And it says the windows of heaven were opened and it began to rain. So we have water coming up from under the earth and rain coming down upon the earth. And so these two waters already mixing or intermixing created a situation of the great flood. We have to remember that in the beginning, God caused dry land to appear. He caused the earth to rise up out of the water, and no doubt there was water under that ground. And he created the firmament in the heaven, and there was water above the earth from the water under the earth, and there was the heaven where the birds fly. And so in the destruction of the world, God basically reversed the process, and the waters above the earth came down in rain, and the waters under the earth were broken up and forced to the surface and caused the land to be covered. And so we're told that rain fell for 40 days. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. But in addition to the rain was the waters that were being forced up from under the earth. So there is a considerable bit. And so in destroying the earth that then was, Peter says in 2 Peter, the 3rd chapter, the world or the earth that was then being overthrown or overflowed with water perished. So what we're going to see later is a new earth. Just touching on this, it's apparent from the fossil record that before the flood, the earth was more a tropical paradise all over because of the canopy, the water that was above the earth, and the design of the earth by God. We see all types of fossils, even in coal and other things, even up in Alaska, very cold. We find ferns and various plants that could not exist or grow in times like today. And so what was once a tropical paradise designed by God, the first earth being overflowed with water, perished. And the result, the end of the flood, is the world that we see today with different climates, different weather patterns, and more extreme heat and cold. But the flood didn't just last for 40 days and 40 nights. There was an additional 150 days after the 40 days that water continued to rise on the earth. That is, whether the land was sinking and the water coming up or just the water coming up, it was about 150 days before all the mountains of the earth were covered. And then, after everything is covered, there was another 74 days, it's over 2 months, before the tops of the mountains were visible again. And so we're looking at 224 days. We, as children, are taught that the flood was, and the rain came for 40 days and 40 nights, and in a child's mind, it seems that it was only a 40-day event. But in reality, it was over a year that the flood was upon the earth. Excuse me. It wasn't until 224 days, or about 2/3 of a year, the earth was covered before they ever began the waters to recede enough to see the tops of the mountains. Now, that's not the valleys and other things, that's just the tops of the mountains. And then it was another 40 days from that, 264, when in Genesis 8 and verse 6, Noah sends out a raven to see if there is a way for it to basically find rest, to nest trees, if there is a place of rest for it. And we're told that the raven returned, and after 7 more days and 271 days, Noah sent out after the raven the dove, and we're told that the dove likewise returned to Noah. And then another 7 days, 278 altogether, Noah sent out the dove again. This time it returned, but it had an olive leaf in its beak, Genesis 8, 10 through 11. And so that means that the waters had receded enough that the trees that were in the upper part of the mountain could be seen, and the dove brought the olive leaf back to Noah. And then another 7 days, 285 days, Noah sends out the dove once again, and in Genesis 8:12 it says it did not return. The dove had found a place in the world for itself. And so after that, another 29 days, Noah removed the cover or part of the roof on the ark, Genesis 8 and 13, and he could see from that the mountains and the earth, the surface of the earth was, and it says dried up, but it was beginning, in essence, to dry up in the sense that the waters were off the land. No doubt at this time the ground was still extremely soft and muddy as it began to dry and settle. And so there was another 56 days, almost 2 more months, that the earth finally was dry enough that God commanded Noah and his family and the animals to come out of the ark. And the flood ends on the 2nd day of the 2nd month, the 27th day. And it was 370 or 371 days after it began. So it was over a year. And this is why everything that had in it the breath of life perished, except that which was on the ark, because there was no refuge, no place where people could escape that flood. And so Noah and his wife, their 3 sons and their wives, as well as the animals, came out of the ark. God again blessed them and told them to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. And so they did. I'm sure probably for a period of time, Noah and his family still used the ark as home until they could probably dismantle some of the parts and pieces of the ark to make for themselves houses and homes until civilization could be restored. So by the 3 sons of Noah and their wives was all the nations of the earth made. Now we find in the scriptures in Genesis 10 and following, we find that we have a list of the various descendants and places, and we're going to look at that. But we also want to touch on the subject of what we call the Tower of Babel or the Tower of Babel. As men began to multiply on the face of the earth, they were in the area of what we know today as Iran and Iraq. That is where the ark came to rest. All the people were of one language, even though God had told them to go into all the world and fill the world. They chose to stay there in what come to be known as the land of Babylon, and they wanted to be one people. And so God came down, he confused their language, which caused them to disperse from each other, and people with the same languages dispersed in different directions and ultimately produced what we now know today as the nations. Before we get into this, I'm going to say it again. I know I've said it before. We need to understand that we in the scriptures are talking about nations and people, but we have to be careful about talking about races. There is only one race of human beings. God made from one blood all humans to dwell on the face of the earth. While today people put race and nationality and nation of origin as somehow their race, and that leads again to more divisions and hatred and disputes. And there are no races of mankind. There is the race, and we all bear the likeness and image of God as we were created and descended from Adam. We have a map here. It's color-coded to kind of show the start of the dividing of the earth among the descendants of Noah. Shem, the Semitic people, Semites, descend from Shem, and they populated the area today we think of as the Middle East, the areas of Saudi Arabia. That was the principal starting point for the descendants of Shem. The descendants of Ham populated the land we think of as the Holy Land, but they populated the peninsula here and became the people of Canaan, or the Canaanite people, and all the various groups. They moved from there down in to what we know as Egypt, and further down into the continent today we know as Africa. And so we have the Shemites that are the Middle Eastern people primarily, at least in the start. The descendants of Ham, who populated the Holy Land, that area, and came over into the continent of Africa. And the descendants of Japheth are the ones who populated Europe and up in the areas of Russia and that part of the world. And so depending on, where your original family came from, and hard for most people to find their family lineage all the way back to either Shem, Ham, or Japheth, although there is some genetics that can be identified in that. This is the dividing of the earth. Now we have a table of nations, and if you're interested in this, I would encourage you to go online. There are various charts. I'm going to look at some points of interest, but on this side of the chart, we have a breakdown of how the immediate descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth came to be some of the people that we know today. For those of our friends in the areas of India who might be interested in their origins, they primarily at that time descended from Japheth, and specifically through his son Java. So Java begot these individuals who were the principal tribes in India. We have to understand that mankind has intermarried and have moved so that, again, going back to these roots are just that. We're looking at how things started here with Japheth and his descendants, Gomer, Magog, which goes up into Russia and that area, and various others that are not specifically addressed here. But for our friends in India today watching, this is your start. This is where the people of India began. Then we have the descendants of Shem, and these individuals were the ones, as we said, who ultimately started what we think of as the Arabian tribes. These are the descendants that were there in the Middle East, in the Semitic or Shemitic areas. And then we have the people of Ham. Mizraim is a word for Egypt, and going down into Africa, and we can see some of the lists. The descendants of Ham that we think of as Canaan are those who ultimately became the Canaanites, Phoenicians. We see all of those whose names are mentioned in the book of Genesis as inhabiting the land before God drove them out and gave it back to the descendants of Shem through Abraham to the Israelite people. And so we have an interesting concept of the flood and God's judgment, but after that, he blessed the world and he allowed us through the various descendants to repopulate and fill the earth. And in so doing, we arrive at what we think of as the nations. In the Bible, at least in the King James and many English versions, it uses the word Gentile. And Gentile merely means nations. And or some translations speak of the nations rather than Gentiles. But those two are interchangeable, and it really means just various nations. And the reason that there is a distinction made is because as we get into our next lesson, we're going to see that out of all the nations, out of all the descendants of Shem, Ham, Japheth, all of those that filled the earth, God chose through the descendants of Shem and the descendants of Abraham to bring out a people specifically for his name, his particular possession, who were supposed to lead the world in faith and knowledge of God. And so we will pick up, Lord willing, there next week as we continue in our series of lessons. We're going to open it up to some prayer in just a moment, some questions in just a moment. But before we do, we'd like to have prayer if you bow with me. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have this day to assemble, to look at your grace and your mercy and your kindness upon mankind. We're thankful, Father, for those such as Noah who found favor in your eyes, that the human race might continue to fill and to inhabit the earth and to experience and hold to those blessings that you gave to us through Israel and through Jesus Christ. And today, Father, the New Testament and the church. Bless the church, Father. Bless those who teach, preach, share your word, that they may have success in bringing the lost to the realm of salvation. Be with the sick, the afflicted, the hurting. Be with the war-torn areas, Father. We pray that peace may soon be restored in those places. Be with us. Keep us in your care, we pray, in Jesus' name. And amen.
Amen.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Brother Brian Barrett, for your wonderful lesson. This is the first time we are hearing the wonderful lessons through explaining chart from the Bible. Thank you. It's helped us. If you have any question, you can ask Brother Brian Barrett. He will be happy to help you. If you have any question, Joshua, you have?
Yeah. Thank you so much, dear brother, for your valuable lessons.
Thank
As
you.
we seeing every week, Monday, such a wonderful message we are getting to you. We are happy that you are seeing your YouTube channels and YouTube videos, as we are regularly watching your videos. And also we are sharing your videos to our friends and so many relatives. They were telling that your words were really useful for them. Before winding up our classes, I would like to ask some question. Why God allowed floods to the world, and why God wants to save the Noah family only?
Well, again, sin had filled the earth, and the earth was defiled. The thoughts and the imaginations of man's heart was only towards sin continuously. There has been much written about this time, that there no doubt was much violence. If you can imagine a person like Cain taking over and leading the world, Cain who killed his brother and his descendants who were filled with all kinds of sin. I believe that God was at the point that he was going to destroy everything. But the footnote that we have is that instead of God destroying everybody and the whole world, he looked and saw Noah, a just man. He was also referred to as a preacher of righteousness. So in the dark times that we read about, what little we know, 1 Peter 3 tells us, and also in 2 Peter, that while the ark was preparing, he was preaching to others. And so God saw something in Noah that he thought could be reproduced, and in a new world freed from all of the sin and the terrible nature of mankind, he could repopulate the earth. So in the beginning, God began with Adam and Eve, and he had populated the earth through their descendants. And through Noah and his 3 sons and their wives, the earth could be repopulated even quicker. And so God showed his grace to mankind in looking for someone who could be the hope of humanity, and Noah was that hope. God blessed him and blessed his family. He established a covenant with him and gave us the opportunity to literally be sitting here today.
Thank you, dear brother. And final question I need to ask: is it the flood and tsunami were same?
A tsunami is probably very little thing compared to the flood. I have no doubt that the description that we have of the fountains of the deep being broken up and forced upward, that's what happens when there is a tsunami. There is an uplifting of the plates, and of course that brings flood. We have to remember that this was more massive. This is on a larger scale than anyone had ever seen or will see again, because part of the rainbow that we see in the sky is God's covenant with us, that he won't destroy the entire world with water again. So we have tsunamis, and they are terrible, but you have to think about a tsunami and multiply that probably by 100. It literally wiped out and covered everything on the face of the earth.
In closing this evening, we wish to thank you again for spending your time in study with us. We hope the lesson has been uplifting and motivational. We encourage you to return again for our next lesson. Until then, may we invite you to visit our website. You will find many study opportunities. Our resource page has links to the Gospel Broadcasting Network, a 24/7 station with many great Christian programs and speakers. In Search of the Lord's Way, with Brother Phil Sanders. We have 2 links for Bibles and downloadable software. If you are looking to really expand your knowledge, perhaps you might like to try World Video Bible School, a college-level learning site free of charge. So, until next time, may God bless and keep you in his care as we walk together in his truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you.